Part of being a technical support professional means restoring services as quickly as possible. Getting to the root cause of an issue in the least amount of steps is crucial, but systems are complex, and oftentimes the key to a problem is buried in thousands of rows of data from a log file or an inventory sheet, or maybe it's just in more than one place. Having the ability to quickly parse through hundreds of thousands of data points would not only reduce wasted time and effort, but it's also going to lead to a more satisfying customer experience and a more satisfying experience for you, the engineer. It just makes you a better engineer. In my work, I often see issues that could benefit from this, but Excel seems to have this stigma that it's made for sales data or for accountants. Well, I'm here to change that. This is Microsoft Excel for technical support professionals. What we're going to start with here is an export of a security scan that shows a host name, an OS, risk level, a name, synopsis, description, solution, blah, blah, blah. This can be any type of data. It's going to be good for our examples. I'll actually put a link to it below so that you can play with this stuff, follow along, and ask questions. Something in a table format, either comma delimited or a CSV or an XLS file, something along those lines will be the kind of data that you want for this. So the first thing we want to do with this kind of data, this is all kind of just raw. You've got one item per column in here, and this is not very useful as it is. Really what we want to do is convert this into a table. So the first thing we want to do is do a Control A, which will highlight all of the items that are in the table. If we scroll to the bottom, you'll see it won't actually go below. It's not going to highlight all of the empty cells, just the ones that have data in them. So with them highlighted, if you would do an insert and table, and by default leave this box checked here and then hit OK. What this will do is it'll convert all of your data into a table that is then sortable, filterable. You can do a whole lot with it. So this is really just the basic beginning. Now, if your data, I'm just going to undo this here real quick. If your data did not have headers at the very top describing what each one of the columns is, for example, when you were to insert that table, if you uncheck this, it will give you some custom names, in which case you'll have to rename them to whatever you want them to be. So it's pretty important before you start to make sure, just call out that you have titles of these columns there. Okay, so let me go back to that. We're going to do, again, Control A, Insert, Table. Click on OK with that checkbox, and now we have these items set up as tables. So the first thing you can do is actually, if you just look at the spaces between any one of these columns, you can adjust these spaces here. But if you just actually double click on a space, what it will actually do is automatically create the column size or resize the column to be fitting to the contents of the information that's in there. Sometimes that's helpful, other times like this here, there's probably a single line in here that's huge and making the whole table or the whole column quite big. So I'm just going to resize this back down again manually. You can also, if you click in this top header area, you can actually drag through here. You can also do the same with rows to highlight multiples. If you basically were to highlight all of these items and then double click on one of these spacers, it would actually automatically, I'll just do it right now, resize everything to be the maximum size. I don't really want that to be that way because it's hard to read, so I'll just put it back. So once we have this, okay, well, what's the point of this? Well, you can do a few things here. One of them is that you can sort. So I can now take this any one of these columns here by using this drop down you see up at the top. You can actually just come to the drop down and then sort it A to Z, sort it backwards. You could sort by color. We can go into that a little bit later. And then there's also filters in here as well. So for example, if I sort A to Z, now I have everything with an A at the top. Now you notice it actually will bring, it's not just sorting this column, it actually sorts all of the data in the table alphabetically based on what's in this column. So I can also sort based on, for example, risk, which will then sort everything by this column in here. Okay, so I'm going to set this back to A to Z. Another example, what we can do is to filter. So using this drop down here again, if you just select the drop down and we go and unselect all of the items here and select only, let's say I only want to see the high items in the list. So select high, click on OK, and now the data is filtered to only show those high risk items. And what it allows you to do, conveniently, you'll notice at the bottom of Excel you've got multiple, there tends to be counters and data points to look at it in the bottom menu bar here. Depending on what you're doing, it'll give you different information. But right now, you know for a fact that there are 373 that are high. If I go and change this filter again, let's see, I clear that, and then I apply the filter again, and we just do medium only, and hit OK. We know that there's actually 5,000 of the items that are in that medium risk. So you can do that with any one of the data points in here. Just make sure when you're done doing that you actually clear those filters. You can actually also, when you've got filters on, if you look in your menu bar, there's a sort and filter. There's actually an option up here to clear filters on every one of your possible columns. Sometimes you'll have a spreadsheet with dozens and dozens of columns. You'll notice when something is filtered, for example, that it has this little icon in here, but sometimes you can miss that, so it's always a good idea to go into the home and then select and filter and clear, so it clears everything. You can actually also highlight something based on the wording itself. So say, for example, in this OS field, if there's multiple items and you want to know how many different versions of Enterprise are out there, maybe there's 2012, 2016, but you only want to highlight Enterprise. If you go again, bring down this sorting list, go to text filters, you've got many options. If you know the exact value, use equals. You can say it does not equal if you want to eliminate only one type of item. Begins with, end with, contains. So in this case, I'm going to do contains, and we're just going to say that, okay, show rows where OS contains, and we're just going to type in the word enterprise and click OK. Now we see that there's 2,932 items, and we've got all of the different enterprise items that are in there. Service Pack 1, if there's a Service Pack 2, it's going to highlight all of them. Or maybe it's all just all the same, but it's going to pull based on that. So we can go and clear that out again. Okay, so moving on now that we have this data in a table, well, that's great, but what if you have data in another table that you want to collaborate with this? You want to have this data interact with another piece of data. So let's say, for example, another one of the sheets that I have here is the support status. So one really important concept to understand is that in order to correlate data between two sources, you need to ensure that one of the data points between the two of them are matching. So for example, and that the more you think about it, the more that makes sense. So in this case, for example, we've got the host name. So I need to make sure if there's a host name column here, that in the data that I'm trying to match to, that I also have a host name column. So the two, if they're not related to each other in any way, there's no way that you can do a comparison between the two of them. I think that's pretty obvious once you start working with it, but it's worth calling out. So if, for example, here I now have a list of all of these host names or server names and their supported status, and boy would I love to be able to get that supported status inside this sheet so that I can go back to the customer to tell them, well, out of all these vulnerabilities, how many of these servers are actually supported? So what we want to do is to start off with this. So I'm just going to highlight all the data in here. Now, this is a good example of what we did before. If I just do an insert, an insert table. See, my table does not have headers, and it knows that. Now, imagine if I did put that check mark on there, you'll see, right, the first host name is actually now become the title, so that's no good. So we're going to insert table, and we'll leave that check off, and now it's going to give me a column 1, column 2. Well, let me just call this host name also, and we're going to call this status. Now, if I highlight all of this data, I'm going to actually bring it into my other sheet. So I'm going to create a new tab down here, a new worksheet. All right, I'm going to press Control A on this to highlight, and then I will do a Control C to copy, and then on my new sheet I will paste that in. Alright, so now we've got two separate tables with information that coincides from one to the other. So let's use for this one, for example, this looks like an Abu Dhabi print server. I actually see that that's in the list, but it's there multiple times. So how do I correlate this support data, the fact that it's supported, back into this sheet? Well, it's actually quite simple. What we want to do is a few things. Is you want to establish this table as a source of data that we're going to reference in here using a VLOOKUP. So what we want to do is highlight this table. In the top left hand corner, rename the table. Right now it's named table 4. That would work, but why don't we just make it something easier? So we'll call it status underscore table. Now it'll be impossible to forget. If ever you want to select that table, if you highlight it, it'll pull it up. The table 3 that we had earlier, that's going to be the table from the previous sheet. So now going into the sheet where you want to pull the data into, what you want to do is just add a column, because that's what we want somewhere for that data to go. And we'll name this one again as well, just call it status. So what we're going to do here is use a VLOOKUP. Now fear not, you don't have to necessarily memorize this, and when you start typing it, you'll notice that Excel will actually help you out along the way. It makes this very easy. When I was first learning this, I kept forgetting, and Excel makes it pretty easy, or pretty hard to forget. So if you hit equal, anytime you're doing a formula, it's equal. VLOOKUP is the name of the formula. Then you're going to hit an open bracket, and you'll see right there underneath, it tells you what it is. So the formula you need to fill out is the lookup value, the table array, the column index number, and the range lookup. Now that's actually really, really simple. So the lookup value that we're trying to look up is, I want to look up this particular host name. So if we just click on it, it fills it in. And it takes everything within that host name column. And then we hit a comma. That takes me to the next item that's in this formula. The table array, well, that's just the name of the table. So we called this one status underscore table. Well, here it is in the list. Just select that, double click, and now we add a comma for the next one. Column index number. So that means in the table that we looked at in the previous sheet, there's two columns in there. What column do you want it to return values for? So the first column was the host name, the second column was the support status. So we're going to put a number 2, hit the comma again, and now this is where you're basically choosing between true and false. True will give you an approximate match. If there's multiple servers with the same name, it's basically going to give you the result for the first one. You really don't want to do that. I've honestly never used this before. I always end this formula by typing false. And then a close bracket to close off the formula, and hit enter. And you'll see Excel is smart enough to know that, well, wait a second, you've got similar names going all the way down this column. As soon as you hit enter, it's going to do what's called an autofill. It's actually going to autofill this formula all the way down the sheet. Now, anytime you're in a sheet like this, when you have a column highlighted, you always see the value of the column up here. So this is just pure data. You click on it, there's text up here, and that's that. Whereas in the support status here, you've got, if you look up, you see the column name, or the formula that's in that particular cell. So as we scroll down, we see the formula, and it pulls this up all over the place, and now you've essentially mixed those two data points together. Really, really simple. Well, now that we have this data, what can we do with it? Well, I mean, it's nice to be able to sort through thousands of rows of items, but what if we wanted to use this new support status field that we had in here to break this data down even further, maybe even create some visualizations for it? How would we go about doing that? Let's say, for example, you wanted to know of all of the hosts that were in here, how many of them are supported versus not supported versus whatever other support statuses are in here. So what we want to do is, again, select all. So Control A, it's a standard Windows shortcut. So Control A, highlight all, to insert and use pivot table. Pivot table essentially takes this data and creates almost like a database out of it. If you've ever used any sort of report builder type tools like Crystal Reports or Power BI, it gives you an interface to build reports based on this data. So what we want to do is to select it here, add this data to data model. That gives us some advanced options we'll need in a moment, and click on OK. This creates a new tab and gives us this report builder that I mentioned. Now, how do we use this? Well, let's take for example, just click in status. By default, it will add status to a row. These, as you saw earlier, are all of the different support statuses we have available. Now, there might be 6,000 vulnerabilities, and there may be hundreds of servers, but there's only 3 unique support statuses. So now we know we have 3 or 4 different unique support statuses. Well, how do we find out how many of these vulnerabilities fall within these support statuses? So let's say host names, the server names. How many of the items tagged with a server name fall into each one of these buckets? If I click in here, by default, it's just going to add it as another row, and it will actually give me a breakdown. If I actually collapse this here, it actually just adds the particular items. So if you wanted to give to a customer the list broken down in a way where you can expand and contract and show each item there, that works. But what if we wanted to count? So if we take this host name and move it into the values, now you see it gives you a breakdown count of each one of the support statuses. Now, there's not 7,000 servers in here. There was just 7,000 instances. So in some cases you had the same server showing up 10 times in a row, 20 times in a row. So this will show you per vulnerability. But what if you wanted to break it down to show you only the actual server names? So right now this is counting all items in the 6900. What we want to do is count unique. So if you just click here and click on this drop down on the values and go to value field settings, and in this list here right now, it's you can sum or count or average. There's all sorts of stuff you can do. If you scroll to the very bottom, click on distinct count. You remember those advanced options I said earlier when you created the pivot table and you had to click that checkbox at the bottom? This does not show up unless you check that box. Click distinct count, hit OK, and now you'll see your grand total. That means there's 500 servers that were in that list, and this gives you the breakdown of each one of those statuses. Pretty cool. Now, what if you wanted to further categorize one of the items we did earlier? Let me go back to sheet 6 that has our support status with the count of servers per item. I'm going to change this to not be distinct count anymore. I'm going to set this to count. And again, this is a count of every item in the list of 6900 and whether its status is supported, not supported, decom, or if it's just not there. So how do we break this out further? Well, let me just go and take, for example, the OS and drag it in there. So, okay, we can actually see that under not supported, here's all the different OSs, and supported, here are the OSs. Or maybe you want to reverse it. Maybe you want to actually go by OS instead. So we've got all the different operating systems available, and then the count of supported, not supported, decommed in that way. Just maybe that's the way that the data makes sense. If we take the OS out and we do just the status and we put it in by a risk, okay, so of the support statuses, what are the different risks? So let's look under supported status. There are 335 items that are high risk. Under not supported, there's 231 mediums. Maybe we can do it the other way around though. Let's look under. We break it down by risk. In your high risk, you've got 14, 3, 21, and 335. Again, these are all just ways of sorting this this data. We can also drag it into columns. It's a little bit of an oddity, but it gives you another way of creating like a matrix of looking at this data with all these different items. Say, for example, if I just took out the risk and made it something, it tends to be messy with that, but if we add in the OS, for example, see, that's not good either. I'll take that out. Now, a nice way to visualize this data too is to copy this stuff out. Just copy it, right-click and copy. So highlight everything, right-click, copy. And then you can right click and paste just anywhere on the sheet, or you can create a new sheet, whatever you want to do. We can just paste these values, and with these items highlighted, you can actually just do an insert and then insert one of the charts. So a good one for this one is a pie chart. So do a 2D pie chart, and there's your breakdown. So now we can go and visualize this to a customer. can just go in and change this and just say, vulnerabilities. Oops. Vulnerabilities by support status. What is that? Vulnerabilities by support status. Now this gives you a compelling visual for your customer to look at. With these graphs highlighted, it's pretty handy that if you go to anytime, this is actually a trick in any Office application, but anytime you have an applet or an item or a table or whatever it is, but there's something highlighted within an Office application, you'll see this kind of highlighted bar here specifically for what the item is. So in this case, it's a chart, and the chart tools for this are you have a design tab and a format tab. It'll always put the appropriate tabs under there so that you can format that item or you can change the design. Some really cool things you can do with pie chart, for example, is you can just automatically, click on these different themes that you have, which is pretty neat. So let's say I like that, I don't know, whatever the default theme is, doesn't really matter. But you saw that it added some numbers in here. Well, how do we make that a little bit better? If you go to add a chart element, these are all the different items that you could possibly have in a chart. So right now, for example, the legend is at the bottom. Well, what if I want to move it over to the left? Well, I can do that simply. This basically allows you to take all of the items from this nice convenient menu and drop them onto the chart as you see fit. So the title on the top, well, let's just say we want to put it no chart or above. You have more options in there. You can probably put it underneath as well, but I'm going to leave it as it is. The data labels, this one's really cool. So you can have none. You can have the number centered, which makes it a little bit hard to read. You can put it at the end, again, still a little bit hard to read. There you go, perfect. So it resizes the chart and it leaves them outside. You can sometimes try to best fit them, but honestly, just having them outside like that makes a lot more sense. Put that outside, and there's your visual. I would then usually just take a screenshot using like a snipping tool. You copy and paste this into an email, and this is where you get that executive, high-level, quick access to the data. Somebody's not looking at a boring table. This is just the information that you need at a very, very quick and compelling visual state. But you saw that it added some numbers in here. Well, how do we make that a little bit better? If you go to add a chart element, these are all the different items that you could possibly have in a chart. So right now, for example, the legend is at the bottom. Well, what if I want to move it over to the left? Well, I can do that simply. This basically allows you to take all of the items from this nice convenient menu and drop them onto the chart as you see fit. So the title on the top, well, let's just say we want to put it no chart or above. You have more options in there. You can probably put it underneath as well, but I'm going to leave it as it is. The data labels, this one's really cool. So you can have none. You can have the number centered, which makes it a little bit hard to read. You can put it at the end, again, still a little bit hard to read. There you go, perfect. So it resizes the chart and it leaves them outside. You can sometimes try to best fit them, but honestly, just having them outside like that makes a lot more sense. Put that outside, and there's your visual. I would then usually just take a screenshot using like a snipping tool. You copy and paste this into an email, and this is where you get that executive, high-level, quick access to the data. Somebody's not looking at a boring table. This is just the information that you need at a very, very quick and compelling visual state. Well, folks, that is the first in what I intend to be a series of videos. I've always tried to express to people how important and critical this type of skill is, and rather than try to teach this over and over again, I wanted to put this video together. So if this topic interests you and you want to hear more, please let me know. Either stop by in person if you know me, or leave a like or comment or something so that we can see if this is something we want to invest some more time into. Thanks much. See you soon.